I used to think college life was supposed to be all about freedom. Late-night pizza, bad decisions, and laughter spilling into the hallways. And in a way, it was. Living with Dan and Kev meant the apartment was never quiet. There was always music, teasing, arguments about football, and the constant thud of someone dropping something in the kitchen. From the outside, I was just another regular guy in his 20s trying to figure out adulthood one laundry disaster at a time. But behind my closed bedroom door, I lived a second life, one I never dared to share. Started small. A borrowed hoodie from an ex, a tube of lip balm, then an eyeliner pencil I convinced myself I bought as a joke. But jokes have a way of becoming habits, and habits have a way of turning into confessions, the kind you never say out loud. I wasn't confused about who I was. It wasn't that. I just liked the softness, the quiet, the way fabric could hug instead of hang, the way a mirror could show someone I actually wanted to see. When I dressed up, I didn't feel like I was pretending. I felt like I was finally breathing. Still, it wasn't something I could share. Not in this apartment, not with these guys. Dan was a good man. Big-hearted, loyal, the type who'd carry someone home from a bar instead of leaving them there. Kev was the class clown, always the first to notice a joke and the last to notice pain. They were my friends, my brothers in all but blood, and yet, I couldn't trust them with this. Because I'd seen how they talked when someone like me appeared on TV. The snickers, the teasing. Not cruel, exactly, just the kind of laughter that says you wouldn't get it if you tried. So I didn't try. I hid. My secret nights became my therapy. When they were out, usually on Thursdays, I'd light a candle, close the blinds, and let the world fade out until it was just me and the soft hum of my laptop. I'd brush out a cheap wig I bought online, smoothing the tangles until it looked halfway decent. I'd put on some quiet music, nothing too heavy, and start the slow ritual that made me feel whole. Foundation, powder, a touch of blush, a little mascara, careful not to blink too hard. I'd pull on a skirt that barely brushed my knees and smile faintly when I saw how it moved in the air. There was always a moment right before I finished when I'd pause and look at myself. Really look. And in those few seconds, everything felt right. I didn't think about labels or rules or whether people would understand. I just let myself exist. That was the secret. It wasn't about pretending to be someone else. It was about not pretending for once. Of course, that peace always came with an edge of fear. My heart would race at every creak of the old apartment. The walls were thin, and the door didn't always latch properly. Every sound from the hallway made me freeze, brush in hand, afraid someone would knock or call my name. I kept my voice low when I played music. I didn't dare open the window blinds, even though I loved how moonlight softened my face in the glass. The fear was irrational, but it felt so real, as if discovery would undo everything I'd built in private. That Thursday was no different. Kev had gone out early, texting that he wouldn't be home until after midnight. Dan, as usual, followed an hour later, his cheerful voice echoing through the hall before the door slammed shut behind him. I waited, always did, for the sound of the lock clicking twice. Once for leaving, once for safety. That was my signal. When the last echo faded, I stood up and started my transformation. The mirror reflected a stranger and a friend all at once. My hands were steady now, practiced. The foundation blended perfectly. The eyeliner didn't smudge this time. My hair fell in soft waves against my shoulders, and the pale pink top I wore glowed faintly under the warm light. The more I looked, the more I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. I wasn't performing for anyone. There was no audience, no expectation. Just me. The kind of me that existed between sighs, soft, calm, and a little bit brave. I sat on the edge of my bed, crossed my legs, and smiled at my reflection. "Hey," I whispered to no one in particular. "You made it." Maybe that's why I never stopped. For a few hours, I could stop being the quiet roommate, the overthinker, the guy who always said I'm fine when I wasn't. I could be something lighter. Still, a part of me always knew how fragile it was. One wrong move, one unlocked door, and the bubble would burst. And that night, for the first time, it almost did. It started as a faint sound, the groan of a floorboard out in the hallway. I froze, brush halfway through a stroke of mascara. My eyes darted to the door. Another creak. I swallowed hard, pulse thudding in my throat. They weren't supposed to be home yet. Kev's laughter was miles away downtown. Dan had said something about bar hopping and wouldn't be back until late. I was sure of it. I stood perfectly still, listening. Silence. The tiny apartment suddenly felt too small. Every shadow sharp, every whisper of the building amplified. I waited a full minute before exhaling, my heart still racing. Probably the pipes, I told myself. Or maybe the wind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. I went to the window, peeking through the edge of the curtain. The street outside was quiet. The lamplight shimmered across parked cars. The world looking peaceful and unaware that my heart was trying to beat its way out of my chest. Then, in the reflection of the glass, I saw the faintest movement behind me. A shadow in the crack beneath the door. I turned, holding my breath. Nothing. But my stomach twisted all the same. The moment passed, the silence stretching longer than it should have, and eventually I forced a laugh under my breath. "You're being paranoid," I told myself, voice shaking just a little. "They're not home. You're fine." But even as I said it, I couldn't ignore the tiny sliver of unease that crept beneath my skin. I'd never been caught before, never even come close. Until tonight, maybe. I sat back down, trying to calm myself, but the quiet didn't feel safe anymore. My reflection still looked beautiful, but the smile I'd painted on was trembling. Somewhere deep down, I knew something was about to change. And I was right, because that was the last night I'd ever feel completely alone with my secret. I remember the exact second my world stopped moving. The mirror still glowed with the warm light from my desk lamp, and I was smiling at the reflection of someone I barely recognized. Soft hair, neat eyeliner. A pink top that hugged my chest just enough to feel daring. For once, I wasn't ashamed of the person in the mirror. I was proud. Then came the sound. The unmistakable jingle of keys in the lock. My body froze. The brush fell from my hand and rolled across the floor with a dull clatter. For a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was one of those phantom sounds you hear when your nerves are already tight. But then came the second sound. The metallic click of the door opening. My heart leapt into my throat. Shit! There was no time. No time to take off the wig. No time to wipe off the makeup. No time to erase the version of myself I'd so carefully built. Panic surged through me in a dizzying rush. The only light in my room was the small lamp by the mirror, and it painted me in warm gold and shadows. There was nowhere to hide. The door to the living room creaked open, and I heard heavy footsteps. Uneven, slow. "Hey!" A voice slurred. "Anybody home?" Dan. Of course it was Dan. The universe had a cruel sense of timing. He was drunk. I could tell from the lazy rhythm of his steps, the sluggish thud of his boots hitting the hardwood floor. I wanted to disappear, melt into the carpet, vanish into smoke. But he was already there, pushing the door open wider. And then he saw me. I'll never forget the look on his face. Confusion, surprise, and something else I couldn't name. His brow furrowed, then lifted, like he was trying to piece together a puzzle that made no sense. "Oh," he said slowly, blinking as if trying to focus. Sorry. Didn't know Jamie had a friend over." My stomach dropped. He didn't recognize me. Not at first, anyway. His eyes moved over me, lingering just long enough to make my skin prickle. I stood perfectly still, heart hammering in my chest so hard it hurt. The silence stretched too long. I needed to say something, anything. "Hi," I said, my voice trembling. Then, instinctively, I pitched it a little higher, softer. Hi." He gave a goofy, apologetic smile, the kind only half-drunk people could manage. "Hey there," he mumbled. "Sorry, didn't mean to barge in. Dan." He actually stuck out his hand before realizing how ridiculous that was. "Wait, that's ya. I live here. It would have been funny if I wasn't dying inside." He blinked again, eyes heavy but kind. "Jamie's friend, right?" "Right?" I squeaked. He nodded, satisfied, like the mystery was solved. "Cool. Sorry again. Didn't mean to scare you. Or interrupt. Whatever this is." He rubbed the back of his neck, swaying slightly. "You look nice." My face burned. "Thank you," I whispered, and that was when his balance betrayed him. He took one step toward the couch, tripped over his own boots, and fell forward with a loud thud. "Oh my God!" I gasped, rushing to him before I could stop myself. He groaned, rolling onto his side. "I'm fine," he muttered. "Just the floor saying hi back." I knelt beside him, carefully trying to keep my skirt from riding up, and helped him sit up. His skin was warm, flushed from alcohol, and his breath smelled faintly of whiskey and lime. "Can I get you some water?" I asked softly. He nodded, blinking up at me like I was an angel he wasn't sure he deserved to see. "You're really nice," he murmured. "Jamie's lucky to have, whatever this is." I smiled awkwardly, heart still pounding. "Stay there, okay? Don't move." I hurried to the kitchen, grabbed a glass, and filled it with water, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. When I came back, he was half asleep on the couch, mumbling something under his breath. "Here," I said, setting the glass on the table. "Drink that when you wake up." He didn't respond, just snored softly. For a moment, I stood there watching him, the absurdity of it all washing over me. My roommate was passed out on the couch, and I was standing a few feet away in a skirt, eyeliner, and a wig. If he opened his eyes right now, it'd all be over. I backed away slowly, then turned and slipped down the hall, locking my bedroom door behind me. My legs gave out before I even reached the bed. I slid down the door and pressed my hands to my face, trying to steady my breathing. The adrenaline still raced through my veins like electricity. I could feel my pulse in every fingertip. "What did you just do?" I whispered to myself. "What the hell did you just do?" But no answer came, just the faint rhythm of Dan's snores in the other room. I peeled off the wig first, setting it on the dresser with trembling hands. The makeup came next. Each swipe of the cotton pad felt like erasing a part of myself. By the time I looked back at the mirror, I was just me again. Regular Jamie. Plain, tired, scared. I should have felt relieved, but all I felt was hollow. He'd seen me, not all of me, maybe, but enough, and somehow the world hadn't ended. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me as I crawled into bed. My mind replayed the moment again and again. The way his eyes lingered, the softness in his voice, the slight confusion that didn't turn cruel. It wasn't disgust I'd seen there. It was something else. But I refused to think about it anymore. I just needed sleep. The next morning, sunlight poured into my room like nothing had happened. The world outside went on. Cars, laughter, footsteps in the hall. But inside, I felt like I'd crossed some invisible line I couldn't uncross. Dan's bedroom door was closed when I finally stepped out, hair messy, hoodie zipped all the way up. The glass of water I'd left for him was empty. That somehow made my stomach twist tighter. I made coffee, tried to study, tried to pretend everything was normal. Then my phone buzzed. "Dan, tell your friend thanks for helping me out last night. She was cute. If she's around again tonight, I wouldn't mind seeing her." I stared at the message for a long time, rereading it until the words blurred. My first instinct was denial. Maybe he still didn't know. Maybe he genuinely thought I had someone over. But the phrasing, "your friend" in quotes, made it clear he did. He knew. He knew it was me. My heart slammed against my ribs. A dozen thoughts collided all at once. Shame, fear, humiliation, and underneath all of them, something I hadn't expected, curiosity. He knew, and he didn't sound angry. He didn't sound disgusted. He sounded playful, interested even. I didn't know whether to scream or laugh or hide under the bed forever. My reflection in the dark screen of my laptop caught my eye, hair messy, eyes wide, and for a second, I almost smiled. Someone had finally seen me, and they hadn't run. That realization should have comforted me, but instead it left me trembling. Because now that the door had opened, I wasn't sure it could ever be closed again. I spent the rest of the day pretending to study, glancing at my phone every few minutes. I never texted him back. I didn't have the courage. But my mind wouldn't stop replaying his words. She was cute. Maybe he meant it as a joke. Maybe he didn't. But for the first time since I'd started hiding this side of myself, I didn't feel completely alone. And that, somehow, scared me even more. I don't think I got much done that day. My textbook stayed open, but my mind refused to cooperate. Every time I read a sentence, Dan's text flashed behind the words like a ghost. Tell your friend, thanks for helping me out last night. She was cute. If she's around again tonight, I wouldn't mind seeing her. Cute. He said cute. My thumb hovered over the message more times than I could count. Each time I told myself I'd delete it, that pretending it never happened was safer. But I didn't. Something about those words anchored me, kept me tethered to this nervous, electric feeling I couldn't explain. Was he teasing me? Or was there something else behind it? Dan wasn't the type to joke cruelly. In all the time we'd lived together, he'd never made anyone the punchline. He was the guy who noticed when someone was uncomfortable, who helped Kev carry groceries for an elderly neighbor just because she'd smiled at him once. A golden retriever in human form, loyal, protective, a little too earnest for his own good. I thought back to the countless nights we'd shared the couch watching old movies, arguing about pizza toppings or who'd win in a street fight, Batman or Spider-Man. He'd always thrown an arm across the back of the couch, casual but close enough that I could feel his warmth beside me. I'd never thought much of it back then. It was just Dan being Dan. But now, every memory replayed in my head with a new tint. Had he always looked at me like that? I remembered one night when Kev was out, and Dan and I stayed up playing cards. I'd lost terribly. I always did, and he'd laughed so hard he spilled his drink. When I'd grabbed a towel to clean it, he'd taken it from me gently and said, "You're too nice, man. Someday someone's gonna take advantage of that." At the time, I'd brushed it off. Now, the way he'd said it lingered differently, like there had been more weight in his voice than I'd noticed. "Stop it," I muttered to myself. "You're overthinking." But the thought wouldn't leave. The longer I stared at his message, the more it felt like a door half open. Not an invitation, not quite a joke, but something in between. And the most terrifying thing was that I wanted to walk through it. By late afternoon, the sun dipped low enough to paint my room in amber light. I sat at the edge of my bed, phone still in hand, and whispered, "What if I did it again?" The idea sent a shiver through me, half fear, half thrill. Dressing up had always been about escape, about stepping into a quiet world where no one could see me. But now, for the first time, I wanted to be seen. My hands moved almost on their own. I opened the drawer where I kept everything, my secret box of self. The wig brushed my fingers like an old friend. The makeup sat in neat little rows, waiting patiently. I told myself I was just going to look, maybe fix my eyeliner, maybe just see. But by the time I stood in front of the mirror again, I was already halfway there. Powder, foundation, blush, the same familiar rhythm. Only this time, my heart wasn't racing out of fear. It was anticipation. "Maybe I'm not as straight as I thought," I whispered, meeting my own reflection's gaze. The words felt both foreign and freeing. And maybe he isn't either. It wasn't a declaration, just a quiet acknowledgement of something that had always been there, waiting. The outfit I chose was simple, not loud or exaggerated. A soft blue top, denim skirt, and the same chestnut wig I'd worn before. I wanted to look like me, just the version of me that had been buried for too long. When I finally stepped back, my reflection startled me. Not because I looked perfect, but because I looked calm, like I'd stopped fighting something invisible. "This isn't about hiding anymore," I murmured. "It's about being seen." I almost laughed at how cliché that sounded, but it was true. Every Thursday before had been an act of secrecy. Tonight felt like an act of courage. As the evening deepened, the faint sound of music drifted up from the street below. Somewhere, someone laughed. Life went on. My stomach churned, not from dread, but from the sense that something irreversible was coming. Then, at 7:12, the front door opened. His voice carried through the hall, calm, sober, the usual Dan. The thud of his bag hitting the floor followed. I heard him take off his boots, sigh heavily, and mutter something about class being too long. My whole body went still. I could hear him walking toward the living room, the same path he'd stumbled down the night before. Every footstep brought a mix of panic and electricity. Then he saw me. It wasn't dramatic, no gasp, no dropped glass. Just a moment of stillness. His eyes met mine across the room, and everything else went quiet. For a heartbeat, I wanted to run. To say, I was just trying something, don't think too much of it. But I didn't. I stood there, hands twisting nervously, waiting for whatever came next. He smiled soft, uncertain, but real. You look amazing, he said. The words hit me like a pulse through my whole body. Simple, unforced, said as if it was the most natural truth in the world. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. All the rehearsed lines, all the explanations, the apologies vanished. My throat tightened. Thanks, I finally whispered. I wasn't sure I'd do this again. He nodded slowly, eyes never leaving mine. I'm glad you did. He took a step closer, and for once I didn't retreat. I didn't mean to freak you out with that text, he said. I didn't know what to say. I didn't expect to feel what I felt. What did you feel? I asked quietly. He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. That same nervous tick he always had when words didn't come easy. I don't know. Curiosity, I guess. Respect. Maybe attraction. It's confusing. I nodded. Tell me about it. We both laughed then. A small, nervous laugh that broke the tension just enough to breathe again. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The space between us felt charged, not with lust, but with understanding. Like two people standing on the same secret they'd both just realized they were keeping. His gaze softened, and when he finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. You don't have to hide from me, you know? My throat tightened again. I didn't plan to show you this side of me. I know, he said, but I'm glad I saw it. I don't know how long we stood there, just looking at each other. Time didn't feel real anymore. All the fear I'd carried, of being found out, of being ridiculed, melted into something quieter, something tender. This wasn't a confession. It wasn't even a promise. It was the beginning of something that didn't have a name yet. When I finally smiled, it was small but honest. You're handling this way better than I thought you would. He chuckled. Trust me, I'm still processing. But it's not bad processing. And for the first time, I believed him. The night stretched ahead of us, uncertain but open. And in that openness, I felt something awaken inside me. A fragile courage, trembling but alive. Because sometimes the scariest part of being seen isn't the exposure. It's realizing you don't want to hide anymore. We ended up on the couch without really deciding to. One moment I was standing there, still caught between panic and relief, and the next I was sitting beside him. Close enough to feel the warmth of his arm, but far enough that a small ocean of unspoken things stretched between us. The room felt smaller than usual. The faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen was the only sound for a while. Neither of us seemed to know how to start. I could feel my pulse in my throat, and the air between us was thick with everything we weren't saying. Finally, Dan broke the silence. I knew it was you, he said quietly. I turned to him, heart jumping. You knew. He nodded slowly, his eyes on his hands. Yeah, the second I walked in that night. I was drunk, sure, but not that drunk. A small, nervous smile flickered on his face. I didn't say anything because, I don't know, it felt like if I did, I'd ruin something you weren't ready to share. My stomach twisted. I thought you didn't recognize me. I did, he said softly. But you looked so different. Not just the makeup or the clothes. The way you carried yourself. You looked lighter, happier. I blinked hard, trying to process that. For a long moment, I just stared at him. My mouth open but words refusing to form. Finally, I exhaled. I was terrified, I admitted. I've been keeping that part of me hidden for years. I don't even know when it started. Maybe in high school, I'd borrow things from my ex's closet when she wasn't home. It wasn't about pretending to be someone else. It was about finally feeling like me. He nodded slowly, his expression calm, attentive. I never thought I'd actually tell anyone. I continued, my voice shaking. It's not that I wanted to hide forever, but I've seen how people react. You know how it is around here. Everyone jokes about stuff like this, but not kindly. So I just learned to keep it behind closed doors. Dan's eyes lifted to meet mine. They weren't full of pity, just quiet understanding. I get that, he said simply. I laughed nervously, half a sob caught in it. Do you, though? Because half the time I don't even get it. Sometimes I feel brave about it, other times I hate myself for needing it. It's like I'm fighting two people inside my head. The one the world sees, and the one who just wants to breathe. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look away. He just listened. I thought if you ever found out, you'd be disgusted. Or worse, you'd laugh. And when you walked in that night, I swallowed hard, remembering the fear. I thought it was over, that everything we had as friends would just shatter. Dan leaned back against the couch, letting out a slow breath. You think I'd really laugh at you? I don't know, I said. I didn't want to find out. He was quiet for a while, thinking. Then, almost hesitantly, he said, Can I tell you something? I nodded. I've always been curious too. My eyebrows lifted. Curious. He smiled faintly, embarrassed but not ashamed. Yeah, about people. About what it means to feel free, I guess. To just exist without worrying if it fits into someone else's box. I've never really talked about it because, well, he shrugged. You know how guys are. Locker room talk. All surface, no truth. There was something disarming about hearing him say it out loud. This was Dan. Easygoing, confident, the kind of guy everyone liked. And yet, here he was, admitting he didn't have everything figured out either. It's weird, he continued. But seeing you that night, it didn't freak me out. It made me think about stuff I've ignored for a long time. About how much of what we do is just performance. I stared at him. You didn't think it was weird? He shook his head. No, I thought it was brave. My chest tightened. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He reached over then, hesitantly, his fingers brushing against mine. It was such a small gesture, but it felt like the world tilted on its axis. My whole body reacted, not in shock, but in recognition. I liked what I saw, he said quietly. Not because it was shocking or different, but because you looked happy. You looked like someone who finally got to stop pretending. The words hit deeper than I expected. I looked away, blinking hard to keep from tearing up. I don't even know what to do with how I feel right now, I whispered. He squeezed my hand lightly. You don't have to do anything. Just don't hide from me. That was it. So simple, yet it cracked something open in me. We sat there in silence again, but it wasn't awkward this time. It was warm, like the air between us had changed temperature. His thumb traced gentle circles against the back of my hand, grounding me. You don't think less of me? I asked, barely audible. He shook his head immediately. No. If anything, I think more of you. I don't know many people brave enough to show who they are, even when it scares them. That was all it took. The knot in my chest loosened, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I let myself breathe. I turned toward him, studying his face, the familiar curve of his jaw, the faint stubble, the softness in his eyes that I'd never noticed before. You really mean that? I asked. He nodded, smiling gently. Yeah, I do. The silence stretched again, but it was different now. Heavier, sweeter. I could feel something unspoken resting in the air between us, waiting for one of us to be brave enough to touch it. I don't know which of us moved first. Maybe we both did. All I know is that the space between us vanished. It wasn't dramatic or movie perfect. It was slow, tentative, a quiet leaning in, a question asked without words. When our lips met, it wasn't about passion. It was about truth. His lips were warm, soft, careful. A promise rather than a demand. I felt his hand tremble slightly against mine, and that tremor made me realize he was just as scared as I was. When we pulled back, we didn't rush to fill the silence. We just looked at each other, heart still catching up to what had just happened. "Well," he said finally, his voice low and uncertain, "that wasn't part of the plan." I laughed, small, nervous, real. "Did we have a plan?" He smiled. "Guess not." We sat there a while longer, hands still intertwined, the hum of the fridge filling the space where words used to be. I could feel the quiet beating of my own heart, steadying with every passing second. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of being seen. Because in his eyes, I wasn't strange. I wasn't wrong. I was just me. And for tonight, that was enough. The days that followed were some of the strangest of my life. Not because anything explosive happened, but because of how quietly everything began to change. It started with little things. The way Dan would linger in the kitchen while I made coffee, leaning against the counter with that lopsided grin of his. The way his shoulder brushed mine when we sat on the couch. The way he started looking at me, not searching for an explanation, but as if he'd already found one. Nothing about it was rushed. It was almost as if both of us understood that what had happened between us, that hesitant, fragile kiss, wasn't something we could name yet. It just was. And maybe that was enough. The first few days were awkward in the gentlest way. We didn't talk about the kiss directly, but everything around it changed. He started cooking breakfast for both of us instead of just himself. He'd set down 2 mugs of coffee, one with a little extra sugar, because he'd somehow noticed that's how I liked it. "Just a guess," he'd say with a smirk, though we both knew it wasn't. We'd spend evenings watching movies, like always, except now. His hand would sometimes rest on the back of the couch, fingers close enough to graze my shoulder. It wasn't possessive or bold. It was quiet, grounding, like a reminder that the space beside him was mine if I wanted it. I did. At first, I told myself it was curiosity, that this was just 2 people exploring boundaries. But as the days stretched on, that excuse fell apart. I found myself waiting for his laugh, his voice, his small gestures of care that had become almost second nature to him. One afternoon, I caught him in the hallway, holding a grocery bag with a look of confusion. "What's that?" I asked. He scratched the back of his neck. I went to the store. I didn't know what kind of makeup remover you use, so I just grabbed a few kinds. Figured it'd save you a trip." I just stared at him for a second, stunned. He looked embarrassed, like he'd overstepped. "Too much." I shook my head, smiling despite the lump in my throat. "No, it's really thoughtful." He shrugged, setting the bag on the counter. "Guess I'm learning new things about the world. And about me," I added. He met my eyes then, and there was something soft in his expression. "Yeah," he said. "And about you." We didn't say anything else after that. We didn't need to. It wasn't all easy, though. Every quiet joy came paired with an echo of fear, the kind that whispered at night when the world got too still. What if Kev came home early one day? What if someone from campus saw me differently? What if Dan woke up one morning and realized this had been a mistake? Those thoughts clawed at the edges of my calm. But Dan, somehow, seemed to sense them without me saying a word. He'd reach for my hand when we passed each other in the hallway, brush a stray lock of hair from my face, rest his palm on my knee while we watched TV. They were small, fleeting touches, but each one said the same thing. "I'm here." And slowly I started believing him. One evening, after dinner, we sat on the couch with a movie playing quietly in the background. I was curled up with my legs tucked under me, wearing one of my softer shirts, the kind I never wore around him before. Dan sat beside me, his arms stretched along the back of the couch, fingertips idly tracing the fabric of my sleeve. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "You make me question things I thought I knew," he said softly. My breath caught. "Like what?" He gave a small, helpless laugh. "Like who I'm supposed to be attracted to. What it means to care about someone. I've always had this picture in my head of what's normal. And it's like you came along and quietly rewrote it." I turned to him, searching his face. "Does that scare you?" He took a long breath before answering. "It should, but it doesn't. It just doesn't feel wrong." The simplicity of it broke something open inside me. I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled, small, trembling. My chest felt too tight, full of warmth and ache at once. "Dan," I whispered. "You make me feel safe." He finally turned to look at me then, his eyes steady. "Good. Because that's all I want to do." The words sat between us, soft and heavy. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. I didn't know if this was love, not yet. But I knew it was something close. Something that mattered. Over the next few days, that safety became my new normal. We'd spend quiet mornings in the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the counter, both of us pretending not to notice how natural it felt to stand side by side. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me from across the room, not with confusion or curiosity, but with an expression I could only describe as peace. It scared me how much I liked it. One night, as the rain tapped softly against the windows, I let the words I'd been holding back finally slip out. "I'm scared," I said quietly. Dan muted the TV and turned to me. "Of what?" "Of people finding out," I admitted. "Of what they'll say. Of losing this, whatever this is, if the world decides it's too weird." He didn't rush to comfort me. He just reached over and took my hand, threading his fingers through mine. "We'll figure it out together," he said. "I can't promise it'll be easy, but I promise you won't be alone." That was all it took. The tears came before I could stop them. Not from sadness, but from relief. I'd spent so long building walls to protect myself that I'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. Dan didn't flinch. He just pulled me closer until my head rested against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat syncing with my own. "Hey," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "You don't have to be brave all the time." "I know," I whispered, "but I want to be." He smiled against my hair. "You already are." We stayed like that until the movie ended, the credits rolling unnoticed. The rain outside softened to a drizzle, and the apartment felt smaller, cozier, like the world had folded in on itself until there was nothing left but us. When I finally started to drift off, Dan adjusted just enough for me to lie against him more comfortably. His arm wrapped around me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "Good night," he said quietly. "Night," I murmured, my voice half asleep. It wasn't the kind of night that demanded declarations or promises. It was simple, honest, the kind of peace that comes when two people stop running from what they found. As my eyes closed, I realized something that made my heart ache in the best way. I wasn't falling for him because he'd accepted the parts of me I hid. I was falling for him because, with him, I didn't need to hide at all. And for the first time in my life, I fell asleep unafraid, wrapped in the quiet safety of someone who saw me completely and stayed. Weeks passed, and life quietly rearranged itself into something new. Nothing dramatic had happened. No grand confessions, no sudden announcements. Yet everything had shifted just enough that the air in our apartment felt softer somehow. Kev still joked too loudly, still forgot to do his dishes, still left his shoes in the hallway. But even he seemed to sense a subtle change he couldn't quite name. He'd glance between Dan and me during breakfast, eyebrows twitching in suspicion, then shrug it off with a grin. "You two are weirdly chill lately," he said once. Dan and I just smiled. Neither of us offered an explanation. We didn't need to. Our relationship, if that's what you could call it, existed in the quiet spaces between ordinary things. In the shared brushing of teeth at the sink, shoulders bumping. In the way Dan would hand me a mug of coffee without asking how I liked it, because he already knew. In the glances that lasted just a second too long when Kev wasn't looking. Sometimes I wondered if what we had would make sense to anyone else. Probably not. But it didn't need to. What we found wasn't about labels or definitions. It was about peace, the kind that grows in the corners of a home when two people finally stop pretending. I catch myself watching him sometimes. The way he stood by the stove, flipping eggs in a pan, hair messy, t-shirt wrinkled. Ordinary, unpolished. But when he turned around and smiled at me, it felt extraordinary. Like every small thing about him had been made to fit into the spaces I used to keep empty. If he noticed me staring, he'd grin. "What?" "Nothing," I'd say, shaking my head. "Just thinking. About us." He'd laugh softly. "You really are a thinker, huh?" And he'd walk over, ruffle my hair, always careful not to mess it up too much, before leaning down to press his lips against my temple. It wasn't the kind of love story people write movies about. There were no dramatic kisses in the rain, no big reveals. Just small, quiet moments that stitched themselves into something whole. At night, when the city noise faded, we'd lie on the couch together, the TV flickering in soft colors against the walls. Sometimes we talked for hours about nothing, about everything. Other nights we didn't need words at all. His arm would be draped around me, fingers tracing lazy circles against my wrist, and I'd think about how strange it was that comfort could feel this electric. The fear I used to carry, the constant, gnawing anxiety of being discovered, had begun to fade. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. Because now there was someone who saw the full picture and didn't look away. I remember one night especially. We were sitting on the balcony, a cool breeze winding through the air, the city humming quietly below. I just told him about the first time I ever dressed up, how clumsy and terrified I'd been, how wrong it felt at first to want something I didn't understand. Dan was quiet for a long time after that. His gaze lingered somewhere in the distance before finally landing back on me. I used to think attraction was just about bodies, he said. His voice was calm, thoughtful. But with you, it's about trust. The words settled deep inside me. He wasn't looking for a reaction, but I couldn't stop the warmth that spread through my chest. Trust? I asked softly. He nodded. Yeah, it's not about what you look like. It's about how it feels to be around you. How safe it feels. I don't know how to explain it better than that. I smiled, small, quiet, full of the kind of gratitude that's hard to speak aloud. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see it in his eyes, the same mix of tenderness and confusion that mirrored my own heart. We were both still figuring this out, stumbling through new terrain without a map. But maybe that was the point. I leaned forward then, resting my forehead against his shoulder. You make me feel safe too, I whispered. He kissed the top of my head. Good. The rest of the night moved in slow motion. The sounds of the city faded, the breeze stilled, and all I could hear was his breathing beside me. Steady, familiar. We didn't talk about the future or about what we were. We didn't have to. There was no need to define it, no urge to label something that was already real. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting on how it had all started. On that night of panic and shame, when I thought the worst thing that could happen was being seen. Funny how wrong I was. Being caught wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. Being seen was what saved me. I used to think my secret made me small, something to be hidden, something fragile. But now, when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see shame. I saw the person Dan had seen all along, someone worth knowing. And maybe that was the real miracle of it all. Because when you find someone who looks at you, really looks, and doesn't flinch, it changes everything. It rewires the way you see yourself. Some nights, lying beside him, I'd catch myself smiling at the ceiling, remembering how terrified I'd been that first night he walked through the door. The irony wasn't lost on me. That the moment I feared would ruin everything had become the moment that built something beautiful instead. One evening, after Kev had gone to bed, Dan and I ended up in the kitchen cleaning up dinner. The radio hummed softly in the background. I was drying dishes when he came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. You know, he said, his voice low and teasing, I still can't believe I almost missed this. Missed what? I asked, smiling. This, he said, squeezing gently. You. Whatever this is. I turned in his arms, laughing quietly. You didn't miss it. You just walked in at the wrong time. He chuckled. Yeah, best mistake I ever made. We stood there for a while, swaying gently to the faint rhythm of the music. The kitchen bathed in the golden light from the stove. There was no rush, no need to prove anything. Just the kind of peace that comes when you stop running from who you are, and from the person who accepts that version of you completely. As the night grew late, we ended up back on the couch, tangled together beneath a blanket. The TV murmured softly, forgotten, while the world outside carried on. I could feel his heartbeat against my back, steady and sure. My eyes grew heavy, and before sleep claimed me, a thought drifted through my mind. One so clear, it almost felt spoken aloud. He hadn't just caught me that night. He'd found me. All the fear, the shame, the pretending. It had all led here, to this quiet corner of peace I never thought I'd earn. And as I drifted off, I found the words that summed it all up. Not just our story, but what it had taught me. He caught me dressed up, but what he really caught was the part of me I'd hidden away. And somehow he made me fall in love with it. And that's the end of our story. If you felt something while listening, maybe a bit of warmth, hope, or even recognition, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories just like it. I'd love to hear from you too. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight, and what part of the story stayed with you the most? Your support helps keep these stories coming. So thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.